Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of AFA's Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, and welcome to our Aerospace Nation series. We're really pleased today to have two very special guests, Mr. Jim Bridenstine, Administrator of NASA, and General J. Raymond, Chief of Space Operations, United States Space Force, and Administrator of Bridenstine leads NASA in advancing America's aeronautic, science, and space exploration objectives, including NASA's return to the moon with the Artemis program, commercial resupply for the International Space Station, and development of the X-59 quiet supersonic aircraft and the X-57 all-electric aircraft. General Raymond is the Chief of Space Operations, United States Space Force. In this role, he serves as the Senior Uniform Officer responsible for organizing, training, and equipping of assigned U.S. Space Forces. Welcome, Administrator and General, and thanks very much for taking time to join us today.
It's my honor.
It's proud to be here. Thanks.
Now, I think both of you would agree with me that it's been a year for the history books for American space experts. Administrator, congrats to you and the NASA team for the spectacular launch, flawless mission, and safe return of American astronauts on American rockets from American soil.
Thank you.
And General Raymond, congrats on approaching the one-year anniversary of the establishment of the U.S. Space Force as our newest branch of the armed forces. Now, given NASA's rich history of collaboration with the Department of Defense, I'd also like to extend my congratulations to your two organizations as you've just signed a new memorandum of understanding between the U.S. Space Force and NASA on areas of cooperation and collaboration. So let's kick things off by giving you both an opportunity to make a few opening remarks, including details about that new agreement between NASA and the Space Force. So why don't we kick off and begin with your perspectives on NASA, Jim?
You bet. Thank you, General Deptula. It's great to be with you. Great to be back at the Mitchell Institute. And of course, I wish we could all be doing this in person, but given the conditions, I think this is a great opportunity to be able to talk to the national security community in a meaningful way. I will tell you, as the NASA administrator, when I talk to, the man on the street or the woman on the street, a lot of people ask me about the Space Force. They say, so how's the Space Force coming along? And, congratulations on the Space Force. And a lot of people conflate the two. And I think it's important that people understand there's a big difference. Our mission sets between NASA and the Space Force are very different, but we share a very similar, in fact, we share the same domain, and we're operating in the same environment. So there's a lot of synergies, a lot of overlap. And of course, when we think about the Space Force, we think about the history of for example, Air Force Space Command, which NASA has had, a memorandum of understanding with now for years. And what we do today, we're updating that memorandum of understanding so that it is now with the U.S. Space Force, which is a fantastic thing to do. And I'm very proud of the teams for getting together and making it happen. You're probably aware I was a big advocate for the Space Force when I was in the House of Representatives. We worked really hard to get the bill passed years ago, and ultimately it got through the House with 344 bipartisan votes. It stalled out in the Senate, and then of course recently it was created with bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate, and of course signed by the President of the United States. So where NASA is, when we think as a national security community, and I do think, NASA plays an important role in national security. We don't do defense. We don't fight and win wars. That is not our role. Our role, when we think about the elements of national power, the national security community talks about DIME, diplomatic power, information power, military power, economic power. NASA plays on the diplomatic side in a very robust way. So for example, on the International Space Station, we have we have 15 different countries operating the International Space Station. We've had astronauts from 19 different countries on the International Space Station. We've had experiments from over 103, I think it's 103 now, it might be more now. 103 different countries have had experiments on the International Space Station. So this is really a tool of diplomacy for the nation. And as we go from low Earth orbit to the moon under the Artemis program, we're putting together a coalition of nations that are going to go sustainably to the moon under Artemis. Artemis, of course, in Greek mythology is the twin sister of Apollo. This time when we go to the moon, it's not just a technology demonstration. We are going sustainably to the moon to deliver science and exploration capabilities in a way that's never been done before. And we're going for the first time with a very diverse, highly qualified astronaut corps that includes women. In Greek mythology, Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo. And so I think this is a unique time in American history where we can go sustainably to the moon. I will tell you that given the challenges that exist in space, it is necessary to have security. And that's why it is so important for NASA to work side by side with the Space Force. So where do we play? We play on the diplomatic side for sure. By the way, we have currently over 700 active agreements with nations all around the world. That's an amazing tool of diplomacy. Now that's, of course, for science and robotic missions to Mars and deep space and astrophysics missions, things like that. Then we have, on the information side, when we think about the power of information, we remember, for example, just a year ago, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, the first of 6 moon landings. And I will tell you, we had over 500,000 people on the National Mall celebrating this achievement that was done 50 years ago. It was a huge event. And what's amazing about it is it was celebrated all over the world. And when Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, it was seen and heard by everybody on the planet all at one time. That's an amazing tool of American power to say, look, we have a challenge sometimes. Back then, it was about reaching behind the Iron Curtain in the former Soviet Union and communicating to people about the values of Western democracy. Today, we think about landing. We landed InSight on Mars. It was one of the first missions that I got to participate in as the NASA administrator. It was a lander that it was the 8th time in human history that we've landed softly on Mars. The United States of America is the only country that's been able to do it, and it received front page news. Oh, I don't know if it was front page news, but it received news in Tehran, and the publication said very specifically it was the hardline newspaper of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran. That is not an organization that generally says anything nice about the United States of America. But in this particular case, they talked about landing on the moon for the 8th time in human history. And in the article, it talked about our international partners that were with us. That's the kind of reach that has the ability to change the perceptions of young people all over the world towards the United States of America in a way that only really NASA has that ability. So we think about diplomatic power, we think about information power. On the military side, that's not where we are, that's not what we do. Of course, there's a lot, we share an industrial base and things like that. Of course, on the economic side, we play very strongly, very, very strongly there. We're commercializing low Earth orbit with commercial crew, which, as you mentioned, General Deptula, we just saw launching American astronauts on American rockets from American soil. That represented a $3.5 billion investment by the American taxpayer, but it was also a public-private partnership. NASA wants to be one customer of many customers in a very robust commercial marketplace for human spaceflight in low Earth orbit. And we also want to have numerous providers that compete against each other on cost and innovation, driving down costs and increasing access. So it's commercially resupplying the International Space Station. Now it's commercial crew to the International Space Station. The next big thing is commercial space stations themselves. And of course, we're going to land on the moon commercially. We're applying the business models that have worked to achieve the objectives that we've already achieved. We're applying those to the next big leap. And of course, that is going sustainably to the moon and learning how to live and work on another world for long periods of time, and then going to Mars. All of these missions are focused on diplomatic power, information power, economic power, and building that economy around a very valuable resource, which is microgravity. And certainly there's lots to say on that. That would probably be an entirely separate kind of discussion. But I'm thrilled to be here at the Mitchell Institute. What I hope people take away from this discussion today, I hope people take away that NASA, yes, we do science, exploration, discovery, we develop outer space, but I really hope people take away that we are an instrument of national power. It is soft power. It is diplomatic power. It's information power. It's economic power. But what we can't do is we can't do any of those things if space is not secure. And that's why it was important to create the Space Force. That's why it's important for NASA to partner with the Space Force on a lot of the things that we're going to partner on. And we're thrilled to have this memorandum of understanding that General Raymond and I just recently signed. And we're thrilled to highlight it here today at the Mitchell Institute.
Thanks very much, sir. Really appreciate it. And with that, over to you, General Raymond.
Thank you, General Deptula. And let me just say how great it is to be here this morning. I too wish we could be doing this in person, but I really appreciate the opportunity that the Mitchell Institute has provided us to talk about what I think is really, really important for our national security and for our country. And I would also like to say it's a real privilege and honor to be here with Administrator Bridenstine. As I mentioned in kind of our little lead up, it's a heck of a lot easier being with him when I'm not testifying in front of him as a congressman. But I will tell you, he's a great partner. And I was really thrilled to be able to be down at Cape Canaveral for the not too long ago launch of, again, as you mentioned, U.S. astronauts from U.S. soil. And I'll talk a little bit about this in my talk. We had a small role in that. But to see the excitement of the nation was just a real thrill. And I want to congratulate the administrator and all of NASA for the great advances they've made here over the last couple of years. I also know that Administrator Bridenstine would agree with me that this is really a defining time in the United States, especially as it relates to space. And our spirit towards this time should be an expansive push for American leadership in all sectors of space. And I'm pleased to say that that's exactly what we're doing today. And I think it's important, as the Congressman, or as Administrator Bridenstine said, that we are distinct in our missions. But in every sector, whether it's national security space sector, whether it's civil, which is, think United States Space Force and United States Space Command, civil sector, think NASA, or commercial sector. And this is a really bad term to use when you're talking about space things, but the explosion of commercial space companies and technologies, it's an exciting time to be in our business across all of those sectors. And I will tell you that our nation is the strongest when all of those sectors are leading the way. And again, as I mentioned up front, we're doing so. And I also say that, I was a young kid. My dad was in the Army. He was stationed. He taught at West Point. And I remember as a very young child sitting in our living room watching man walk on the moon and being inspired. And I think that today, with all the activity that's going on in all the different sectors, we're going to young folks in our nation are going to be equally inspired today. And I think that's going to be a really good thing for all of the sectors of space. And you look at folks that are applying for astroengineering degrees at universities across the country is up. We have people knocking on our door, asking us how to get into the space business, the Space Force. We have way more people knocking on the door wanting to come in than we can take on our books. And I'm sure, I don't want to speak for Administrator Bridenstine, but I'm sure there's similar things happening in his organization as well. I think it's important that we understand this is Administrator said, the difference in our mission sets. It is a different mission set. As the nation's newest branch of the armed services, we are all about our national security space enterprise, making sure that our nation and our joint and coalition warfighters have the space capabilities that they need to provide advantage to our nation. We've done this for years. We operate capabilities like GPS satellites, like communication satellites, weather satellites, missile warning satellites to detect any missiles that might threaten the United States, space domain awareness satellites to have a better understanding of what's going on in that domain. We share that information broadly, including with NASA. We integrate these capabilities into everything that we do as a joint and coalition force. And what's new today is that we also have to protect and defend those capabilities to make sure that the domain is safe and stable. NASA, on the other hand, as Mr. Bridenstine talked about, is in the science and technology and exploration and interplanetary types of missions, aeronautic types of missions. And so they're distinct, but we operate in the same domain. We operate in that same space domain. And if you look at what we share, the common areas, I mean, we share partners. Administrator talked about the partners that they have. We have developed significant amount of partnerships in the national security space business. We share some of those partners. We share an industrial base. We share the desire to have a domain that's safe for all to operate in. We share the desire for security in space. We share R&D. We share science and technology. We share roadmaps, if you will, for things that would be of benefit for both of our organizations. And so this MOU that we're signing today reiterates the close collaboration that we've had with NASA since the beginning. I mean, if you look at it, we have had a very strong partnership. If you look at the Mercury 7, all of those Mercury 7 astronauts were military test pilots, every single one of them. In 1958, when the U.S. Air Force Academy was established, they established the astronautics program. We've had 42 different graduates from the Air Force Academy that have gone on to become astronauts. We partner in space situational awareness. We have NASA representatives on our operations floor. One of the thousands and thousands of objects that we track, the most critical object that we track is the International Space Station, making sure that we can keep that asset safe and protect the astronauts that call that home. We sit side by side with NASA, providing them information to make sure that we do that well. We provide range support at our launch ranges, both at Vandenberg and at the Cape. And I mentioned the recent launch of humans, astronauts from the Cape. We worked very closely with NASA to be able to do that and to do that safely. On the other hand, we also had rescue forces that were under my command at the time when I was the U.S. Space Command commander to make sure that we could protect those astronauts if something were to go wrong. So we provide weather support to NASA, space domain awareness. I mean, the partnership is really, really strong, and we're excited to continue that and to enhance it even more going forward. The MOU is just another step in reiterating that partnership and to expand that partnership, especially if you look at the U.S. Space Command mission set and the AOR for U.S. Space Command. It says that the AOR for that command is 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface globally and outward. And so our domain that we have to organize, train, and equip for and to provide capabilities for U.S. Space Command to conduct its mission goes well beyond GEO. And as NASA explores out and gets to the moon and eventually gets to Mars, we think there's really some common collaboration efforts to be had between the two of us. And with that, I think I will just conclude by saying it's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to be on the panel with Administrator Bridenstine. We are very proud of the partnership that we enjoy. I think having three sectors of space, national security, civil and commercial, all leading the way globally is really, really important to our nation, adds strength to our nation. And I am sure that I can guarantee under my leadership and partnership with Administrator Bridenstine, this partnership will only grow closer in the years ahead. And with that, General Deptula, I will turn it back to you and take it for the rest of the time.
Well, thanks both of you for those remarks. Let's dig a little bit deeper into some of the topics that you hit upon, and I'm sure our audience is interested to hear about in more detail. Both of you touched upon collaboration. both NASA and the Space Force conduct research and development efforts for space systems and technologies. You conduct ground ops that support our national objectives in space, and you both operate on-orbit systems. So tell us a little bit about how NASA and the Space Force deconflict your roles and responsibilities in these areas. Jim, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the big thing is what NASA's job is science, discovery, exploration, and so as long as our missions are focused there, I think there's that's where we play, and that's where we do really good work. It is also true that the space domain is becoming more challenging, and those challenges affect NASA just like they affect commercial operators, just like they affect NOAA, for example. And that's really where we rely on the Space Force to be supportive of what we're trying to achieve. We think about proliferating technologies like jamming and spoofing, and using laser energy for dazzling, and hacking, and these kind of things that affect pretty much everybody in the space domain. The question is, what how do we attribute those things that are happening in space? I think getting to that attribution piece is critically important, and it's very difficult when it comes to space. And of course, one of the things that we see in the future is when something strange happens to NASA, we're going to be sharing that data. We're going to be sharing it quickly. And of course, it has been true in low Earth orbit and all the way out to geostationary orbit. But the next big thing is cislunar space and even the lunar surface. We want to see behaviors improved in space, and so that's really I think from a national security perspective, there's two ways of doing it. One is no kidding, hard power, which is what the Space Force is all about, and then two is soft power. So I'll give you an example. The Artemis program is the envy of so many nations around the world. We had a meeting the other day. We invited countries to come. Who wants to be with us when we go to the moon? We had 26 nations show up. Some of them didn't even have space agencies, but they want to be with us on the moon, and we want them to be with us on the moon. This is a tremendously valuable diplomatic tool. And so we decided when we saw the level of interest and enthusiasm that we could use this as a tool to compel behaviors in space that would be appropriate for a spacefaring nation. And a lot of those behaviors are already enshrined in the Outer Space Treaty, for example, and they're agreed to with conventions like the Liability Convention and the Registration Convention. But not all international players are as good at adhering to those agreements as we would like them to be. So look, if you want to be with us when we go to the moon, if you want to be with us on the Artemis program, we want you with us. But we also need you to agree to basic norms of behavior. And those basic norms of behavior are ultimately what will preserve space for humanity to continue doing the exploration and development and the building of commercial capabilities. So I think we play really on that diplomatic side, and I know, and I'll let General Raymond talk about it, but I know he is working with partnering with national security institutions around the globe to make sure that space is secure on the national security front as well. So I think we need all of the above, and of course I think there's going to be eventually a merging between what NASA is doing on the civil space side, what the Space Force is doing. Like, what are the norms of behavior that all nations need to abide by in order for us to be able to sustain space for the long term? General Raymond, I'll let you answer.
I first of all, I agree with everything you said. As I listened to the question, I hear the question, John Deptula. My view is the deconfliction part's relatively easy. It's that there's two distinct mission sets, and so you really don't have to work all that hard to deconflict activities. I think the inverse of that question is where we are really focused on with two distinct mission areas. Where do you collaborate? And I think what we have come to understand over the course of decades is that there's way more areas to collaborate than there are areas where you have to deconflict. And I think norms of behavior is one of those. We share the same goal of having norms of behavior to drive safe and professional behavior in the space domain. We're working that very, very closely with the partnerships. Probably one of the things I'm most proud of in the first 9 months of the existence of U.S. Space Force is just how far we have come on developing partnerships with our allied partners, and the robust space domain awareness sharing agreements that we have. In the case of NASA, it's way more than just sharing data. As I said, we sit on the floor together. We do the analytical work together. It's a partnership that is really, really tight to make sure that we can protect that most valuable asset of the ISS. And so, again, I would say that the deconfliction isn't that hard because it's two distinct mission sets. But if you look at R&D and technology roadmaps and S&T and partnerships and the need to understand what's going on in the domain, the need for norms of behavior to keep the domain safe for all, there is so much there that's ripe for collaboration that would be of benefit for both organizations. And that's really what this MOU is focused on.
Oh, very good. Thank you both. Now, a related issue involves responsibility for dealing with the Outer Space Treaty, like the administrator mentioned. For those of you who are not that familiar with the treaty, bottom line is it makes countries responsible for their actions in space, and it prohibits national appropriation of areas in space. So is there a shared role between NASA and the Space Force in holding other players in space accountable? Administrator, you mentioned the point on attribution. General Raymond, are you responsible for attribution of other nation or other players who might not recognize whether they're a nation or a commercial or a subversive organization, but who's responsible for maintaining the security of national and allied assets in space, and how do both your organizations
Sure
that out?
If you don't mind, Mr. Bridenstine, I'll jump in
Go
first
ahead.
here, and then
You bet.
so first of all, to answer your question, who's responsible on securing that domain? That's the United States Space Command commander. That is signed in the unified command plan by the president that says here are the missions that are set for that command. Up until a few weeks ago, I was both the Space Force chief and the U.S. Space Command commander. Today, those are two different people. I'm the Space Force chief, and General Jim Dickinson is the commander of U.S. Space Command. So he's responsible for that. My job is to organize, train, and equip to provide him the capabilities to be able to conduct that mission. I think Mr. Bridenstine and I would both, again, I don't want to speak for him, but I would guarantee that he will say that we both want to live up to the Outer Space Treaty. From my perspective, if you look at what's in the Outer Space Treaty, it's not all that limiting. It says you won't put a nuclear weapon in space, and you won't use the moon, for military operations, if you will, and other celestial bodies. Short of that, it's the wild, wild west. And so I do believe that there is common interest between both NASA and the Space Force to develop norms of behavior. Now, they might be different because there's distinct mission sets, but as we work those with our partners, some of those being the same partners. And if you look at some of the folks that we're partnering with that are very early in their space programs, the space programs that they have are more of a NASA equivalent than a military equivalent. And so I really believe there's some synergies there that as NASA develops their thoughts on norms of behavior for the Artemis program, and as we develop working very closely with our partners where we want to go to with norms of behavior for national security space, that there's an intersection there that would be of value to share and to discuss back and forth between the two organizations. And Congressman or Administrator, back over to you.
It's all right. It happens all the time. Okay, so I think I'm in full agreement with what General Raymond said. I think we're both very committed to the Outer Space Treaty and adhering to the principles of the Outer Space Treaty. There's a couple of things where I think NASA could be maybe more forward leaning, and that is when you think about the liability convention of the Outer Space Treaty. It's really been tested once. There was a satellite that re-entered and hit Canada, and there was some damages paid from one country to the other. That's the only, and that was decades and decades ago. The question is, today we're seeing satellites break apart, and we're seeing things get jammed, and the question is, can we test the liability convention in a more robust way? Because the Outer Space Treaty is not just for fun and games. It's intended to actually modify behavior in space. And if we're not testing the liability convention, then it's really not worth the paper that it's written on. So I think we need to be maybe more forward leaning on ensuring that the Outer Space Treaty is adhered to. It's also true, when you think just 2 or 3 weeks ago, we announced that we're going to actually buy lunar regolith. NASA is going to procure commercially some lunar soil, if you will. So we're sending what we call commercial lunar payload services, CLPS, to the moon. We want to go to the moon with small instruments, and we're going to buy some lunar soil. It is absolutely true that under the Outer Space Treaty, you cannot appropriate the moon for national sovereignty, and we don't want to appropriate the moon for national sovereignty. But we also believe that when we think about how we operate over international waters, for example, I'm a Navy pilot by trade. How we operate over international waters, we operate due regard. You don't own the airspace in which you fly. And when you think about how we operate in international waters to extract tuna, for example, or to extract energy, oil, just because you extract tuna from the ocean doesn't mean that you own the ocean. Just because you extract oil from the ocean doesn't mean you own the ocean. You operate over international airspace and on international waters due regard. And I think that same policy should apply on the moon. Just because you extract a resource from the moon, what we're interested in is the water ice. We have found hundreds of millions of tons of water ice. Water ice is life support. It's air to breathe. It's water to drink. It's also hydrogen. Hydrogen, of course, is the same rocket fuel that powered the space shuttles and will power SLS. It's hundreds of millions of tons of hydrogen on the surface of the moon. Let's use it. But the utilization of a resource on the moon is not the same thing as national appropriation. In fact, we've got many years of law and precedent that would indicate that you can use a resource and not appropriate that territory for national sovereignty. So when we look at the Outer Space Treaty, I think it's important for us to make sure that it is being defined appropriately. And it's also true that in this particular case, I was in the House of Representatives in 2015 when we passed the the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act. And in that, we actually put in the bill. We defined how the United States of America will interpret the Outer Space Treaty to include that we can extract resources from the surface of the moon, and those resources can ultimately be sold, and purchased by private entities and people. And by the way, that passed the House with strong bipartisan support. It passed the Senate with strong bipartisan support, and it got signed into law by President Obama back in 2015. So I think we're on very solid ground there. But I do think it is important for NASA as an institution to make sure that we are 100% in compliance with the Outer Space Treaty. But as General Raymond said, it's pretty vague in so many areas. So if we don't define it, somebody else will, and their interests might not align with ours. So we've got to make sure that we're very active in defining, some of those provisions in the Outer Space Treaty.
Thanks very much. General Raymond, what are some of the Space Force mission requirements above GEO and cislunar space as distinct from NASA's mission requirements? And how well are you and NASA working together on the technical challenges of operating above GEO, such as navigation, communications, and so on and so forth?
So again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, our mission is to organize, train, equip, provide capabilities to U.S. Space Command to operate. If you look at the AOR that U.S. Space Command has to operate in, it's a very vast AOR. I mean, 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface and higher. It goes well beyond geosynchronous orbit, and so obviously we are looking beyond those orbits to be able to conduct the national security space mission that that the U.S. Space Command is going to have to conduct. And so areas that we are focusing on, for example, as an example, would be space domain awareness. And we are working a close partnership with NASA to develop the domain awareness necessary to support their efforts and to also support our national security efforts going forward. And so communications, you talked about that as well. And we have some really strong technology roadmaps and partnerships that are developing and that are being further integrated to show that intersection where, as NASA goes out to the moon, for example, that we can collaborate with on areas that would be beneficial for our national security space mission. Again, two distinct missions, but we rely on similar things. You got to be able to communicate. You have to understand what's going on in the domain around. You have to be able to navigate, precision navigation and timing. And so all of those things out beyond what we have traditionally operated in, which is geosynchronous orbit and below, if you will, now are expanded, and that expansion again is enabled by a close partnership with NASA.
Excellent. Another interesting topic, one that people it's coming back into the news, and that's the subject of nuclear power use for space applications. It can certainly bring out passion in the discussion of both the pros and cons. And as an aside, so you might get a chuckle out of this, I actually did my 6th grade science fair project on nuclear space propulsion back in the early 60s.
Wow, that's an impressive 6th grader right there.
Yeah, well, my dad had a little bit of influence on me, but I actually remember pretty vividly some of the designs of the spacecraft and ionization and so on and so forth. I won't bore you with the details, but I'm a fan. And Administrator Bridenstine, you see nuclear propulsion as having extraordinary value. You've described it as almost a must-do. So could you share with us NASA's thinking about the future of its space applications and how we can help a skeptical public understand how we can safely integrate nuclear propulsion into both NASA and military space programs?
Absolutely, and I think General Raymond and I will both agree wholeheartedly that in no way would we ever consider putting weapons of mass destruction in space, which is fundamentally prohibited by the Outer Space Treaty. So I want to be clear, that is not what this is. What we're interested in doing, if you look at traditional chemical rockets, when we go to Mars, which we are going to Mars, when we go to Mars, it's basically a 9-month journey to get to Mars when Earth and Mars are aligned on the same side of the sun. And then after you're there, you're no longer in alignment, which means you have to wait 2 years before you can come home, because that's the next time Earth and Mars will be on the same side of the sun. So that's a lot of radiation exposure. I mean, lots of radiation exposure, and could be very damaging for the human system. So what we have to do is we have to figure out how to get there faster. And there's ways to do that. And those ways include using nuclear propulsion. So first of all, there's nuclear thermal propulsion, which is basically heating up hydrogen. But propulsion has never changed. It's basically the same. It's force equals mass times acceleration. So you take a mass of something and you accelerate it out the back of a rocket, and it shoots you the other direction. So it's basically Newton's laws of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, and force equals mass times acceleration. So Newton's laws of motion apply today as they did, in the 1950s. What we can do today, though, is we can get more speed by using nuclear power to heat the hydrogen and accelerate it out the back of a rocket. Now we're limited as far as nuclear thermal propulsion goes, because all of that chemical still comes in contact with the skin of the rocket, which there's a limitation from a material science perspective on how much thrust you can get from nuclear thermal using hydrogen. However, if you talk about nuclear electric, I know the Space Force has been using nuclear electric propulsion for the position of satellites, for example. We are developing scaled up solar electric, I should say. Space Force has used solar electric for commercial satellites and other things. We're using solar electric for the Gateway. We're building a space station in orbit around the moon. We call it the Gateway. It's going to be a really scaled up, solar electric propulsion for the purposes of maneuver around the moon, so we can get to any part of the moon anytime we want. But even more importantly is how do we go from basically solar electric to nuclear electric? So when we talk about electric propulsion, we're talking about accelerating ions, accelerating subatomic charged particles. So if force equals mass times acceleration, and you're accelerating subatomic charged particles, that's not a lot of mass. What does that mean? That means you need a lot of acceleration. And so how do you get that acceleration? Well, you do that with nuclear power and electricity and magnetism. And when you have the magnetism, those subatomic charged particles never come in contact with the skin of the spacecraft because they can be controlled with magnets. And all of that is tremendous. So we're talking about accelerating subatomic charged particles to a percentage of the speed of light. The goal here, General Deptula, is to be able to travel to Mars in a matter of months, maybe 2 or 3 months, not 9 months. And when you're at Mars and you're not on the same side of the sun anymore, how do we come home when we're on opposite sides of the sun? Well, you can use Venus as a gravity assist with nuclear propulsion to do what we call an opposition class return mission from Mars when you're on opposite sides of the sun. So nuclear propulsion, thermal, nuclear electric, all of these technologies are going to fundamentally transform our access to our own solar system. So we absolutely need to develop it. And I know, but to be clear, these are not weapons grade materials at all. And they couldn't even be used for weapons if you wanted them to be used for weapons. This is about propulsion, pure and simple. I will also say that when we go to other worlds like the moon or Mars, we're going to need power, lots of power. And so there's room for nuclear power on the surface of the moon and on Mars as well. But to be clear, again, we're not interested in putting any kind of weapons in space. Not weapons of mass destruction, I should say. Not that NASA does weapons at all, but the Outer Space Treaty talks about a prohibition on weapons of mass destruction in space.
Fascinating insights, and I think that will help the public understand that there's a tangible there that you talk about in the context of shortening the amount of time that it takes to transit between the Earth and Mars. So thanks very much for that insight. And I'll have to go back and dust off my 6th grade science fair project. Send NASA my conclusions. Okay, NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office is still only a few years old, and it currently works cooperatively with many government entities to mitigate the effects of potentially hazardous objects in space. Has NASA and the Space Force discussed at all how you all might collaborate on this mission? And some have asked, might some of the mission set be shifted from NASA to the Space Force? General Raymond, care to comment?
Clearly that is a NASA, in those distinct mission sets, the Planetary Defense mission falls to NASA. But we do have capabilities that can help NASA, and specifically, some that I would highlight would be the space domain awareness. We have optical sensors, for example, that could help detect potential threats, and then we have data sharing arrangements with NASA to to be able to provide that data to NASA to assist them in being able to conduct that mission. So I do think there is a partnership to be had. There is a partnership that exists today. We are all about sharing any information that we can, that we pick up with our sensors, that could use as a dual purpose to help detect potential threats from boloids, for example, and share that data with NASA to help them do their mission.
Very good.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think one area, NASA worked with the Space Force on integrating some algorithms into the Space Surveillance Telescope, it was in New Mexico. Now it's down in Australia, and they're doing space domain awareness. We're looking, as General Raymond said, we're looking for bolides that could collide with the Earth, and having our algorithm in their system enables us to see things that we otherwise wouldn't be able to see. So there's collaboration there. And I would also say, when we're going to the moon here by 2024, we're going to have humans on the moon. We're going to have a number of experiments robotically on the moon as early as 2021. And in 2022, 2023, we've got a lot of robotics going to the moon in the coming years. And I think, when we think about the sensors that we put on the moon, what NASA's interested in, we are interested in buying data, which means we don't want to purchase, own, and operate the hardware, but we want to buy data. And the reason we want to buy data is because, if you put an optical sensor, for example, on the moon, which is an extremely stable platform, we can use that optical sensor to detect, exoplanets around other stars, because it's such a stable platform, the moon, that we can see the flicker of a star in exceptionally faint ways, which means if a planet circles in front of a star, we can detect it in a way that you couldn't detect from a free flyer in space, and we can't detect it, from Earth because of the atmosphere and other reasons. So the moon has a lot of value there, and NASA's interested in buying data. And the reason we want to buy data is because then other agencies can also buy the data. The Department of Energy is, they're interested. They made an announcement just the other day. They're going to do an RFP to put sensors either on or around the moon to better understand physics. They have a mission to understand high energy physics, high energy particles, and of course NASA is partnering with the Department of Energy on those kind of activities. So when we think about very low frequency radio telescopes, when we think about optics on the moon is a platform for all sorts of really situational awareness capabilities, to include the ability to see objects orbiting the moon. We're going to need, we talk about space traffic management around the Earth. If you look at all the stuff that we're sending to the moon, not just the United States, but Russia and China and India and Israel, all of the objects that are going to be orbiting the moon, landing on the moon, we're going to have to do space situational awareness and space traffic management around the moon, if you can imagine that, or else it's going to become very dangerous around the moon as well. So NASA wants to be a data purchaser, and then those kind of platforms would be available for other agencies to purchase data as well for their own purposes and task for different mission sets. So I think there's room. I'm thinking futuristically here, but I think with the various agencies responsible for deep space, I think there could be a lot of room on the moon for these kind of activities.
If you look at our focus on space situational awareness, it's a big data challenge. I mean, if you look at the numbers of objects that we track today, and the hundreds of thousands of observations that we take every day to keep the domain safe for all, and all those observations we share broadly with our partners and with those that have sharing agreements, it's a big data challenge. And so one of the big focus areas for the Space Force has been about building the data infrastructure that we can take multiple sources of data and put them together at multiple classification levels, and then provide the analysis on top of that data to help us solve some of the tough challenges. And when you're looking at the size of the space domain and the volume of space that you have to have awareness of, and the speed of which those objects maneuver or orbit, it's a really tough challenge, and we are also very focused on being able to harness that data.
Well, thank you very much to both of you for those insightful comments. We've now come to the end of this segment of our discussion. And as an alert to our listeners, our next event is next week on Thursday, the 1st of October, when the Mitchell Institute is going to roll out our new policy paper on attritable and or reusable unmanned aerial vehicles. Now, we're now going to open our session to questions from the audience who've been listening to our conversation. As a reminder to our listeners, you can participate in the Q&A by using the raise hand function on the device. And please, when I call on you, unmute your mic and state your name and affiliation. You can also submit questions in writing using the Q&A function. And I'm going to kick off with one of those because we have a very good one from Joey Roulette, and it's for General Raymond. General Raymond, how does the U.S. balance its defense against Russia with NASA's interests of sustaining its relationship with Moscow on the International Space Station? Would the Space Force like to see Russia collaborate on the Artemis program?
Yeah, so I think, there's a long history here. Even in the Cold War, in the height of the Cold War, there was great collaboration in the civil sector. I mean, there's always been strong collaboration with Russia and NASA, and I think that's a benefit for our nation, and I think it's something that should continue. I'll turn that over to Administrator Bridenstine for more, but I think that's one area. Even in areas where whenever countries disagree, there's always been agreement on and partnership on the civil use of space.
So obviously, next month, I guess in November, we're celebrating 20 years of Russian cosmonauts and NASA astronauts living and working together on the International Space Station. So that really is a monumental achievement of diplomacy when you think about all of the terrestrial challenges that the two nations have. So I do think, it's a channel of communication. It's an important kind of diplomatic tool. I would also say, as General Raymond said, we go back to 1972. We're in the height of the Cold War, and we had the Apollo-Soyuz program, or if you're Russian, they call it the Soyuz Apollo program, which was kind of a groundbreaking effort of collaboration. Then, we had the shuttle Mir program, where they built the space station Mir. We built the space shuttle. We collaborated there. That was in the 80s and 90s, and now we've got the space station program. So there's a lot of history here. I know the Space Force has a very different mission than NASA, but as far as a tool of diplomacy, I think we're doing good by our nation.
Thanks very much, and your answer reminded me we had General Tom Stafford come speak to Mitchell Institute about that mission. It was just absolutely fascinating. So from both of you, it's a great point on partnering with the folks that we seem to be able to do better in space than we do in terms of relationships inside the atmosphere. Let me turn it over to Sandra Irwin for her question.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Administrator Bridenstine and General Raymond for this briefing. I have a question for General Raymond. China has not been mentioned in this discussion so far, and I know that you've raised some concerns about China and their behavior in space, and I was just wondering, how would you suggest moving forward that the U.S. should work with China to make space more secure and deal with some of the concerns that you have? Thanks.
First of all, I'd just say that the United States Space Force is reaching out and has very, very strong partnerships across the globe with like-minded nations to operate in a safe and professional manner. We share data back and forth. Again, as I mentioned up front, the partnership aspect of what we've done with the Space Force and really leading up to the Space Force over the last few years. And when we set up U.S. Space Command, we developed a combined command. I mean, we're not just sharing data with our partners. We're operating together. We've got a very strong partnership base. We share information broadly across the world. And I would just call on all nations to operate in a manner that reflects the safe and professional use of space.
Administrator,
good.
do you have any comments about China?
So NASA is prohibited from cooperating with China in any bilateral way, and we're prohibited by law. And so I would imagine that that could change if their behavior were to change. But until Congress passes a different law or lets the current appropriation, it was done in an appropriation bill. It's done annually in an appropriation bill. Until that expires and Congress doesn't reinstitute it, we're not going to be partnering in a bilateral way.
Thank you.
Okay, how about Teresa Hitchens?
Hi, this is Teresa Hitchens with Breaking Defense, and thanks to everyone for doing this today. I have a two-part question. First, for Administrator Bridenstine, my question is about lunar resources, and you sort of made the comparison to extracting fish from the ocean, but resources on the moon are finite. So anything you take, you mine, or you remove, they're finite resources, and that's different than fish. Fish will repopulate. Lunar regolith is not going to repopulate. So how do you work that with our international partners? And for General Raymond, as you look beyond GEO to cislunar operations, can you explain to me what you see as the Space Force's mission in protecting or defending commercial interests who might run into trouble in space or on the moon or in Mars? That is not a mission that was traditionally in Air Force Space Command or the Air Force's bucket of mission sets. I don't see it in the current doctrine paper that you put out. So I wondered if you could explain that mission to me. Thank you.
So a great question. As far as the lunar resources question, a couple of things to keep in mind. The resources that come from the ocean that would be energy are also finite, and yet we're able to extract those resources from the ocean. And if the fundamental law that applies is if you apply your sweat and your equity and your investment, your capital to extracting a resource, you receive the benefit of owning the property right of that resource while you don't also own the ocean. So that's the fundamental property right that exists, whether it's fish or energy from the ocean. On the moon, that same principle, in my view, and of course passed by the United States Congress with bipartisan support, signed by President Obama, that's the way we have interpreted the Outer Space Treaty. And I will tell you that we've had broad consensus that this is an appropriate way to explore and develop the moon. Now, if we get to a day where we're running out of resources on the moon, I will tell you that NASA will have done an amazing job. We're not anywhere, of course, near that. But in my view, we need to make sure that we set the regulatory certainty to encourage the capital formation necessary for commercial companies to go and do these types of activities. And I will also say, look, we talk about rare earth metals on Earth, platinum group metals. These are asteroid impacts from billions of years ago, and these asteroid impacts, of course, are today on Earth they call them rare earth metals. They're very trace when you find them. It's because the Earth has an active geology. The Earth has an active atmosphere, an active hydrosphere. So nothing is today where it was billions of years ago when it collided with the Earth, and that's if it could even get through the atmosphere to begin with. We saw, of course, what happened with Chelyabinsk. That was a big asteroid, 20 meters wide, and of course it exploded, miles above the surface of the Earth. So it's really hard for asteroids to actually make impact with the Earth. You look at the moon. The moon is riddled with asteroid impacts, and it continues to be impacted regularly. The Earth and the moon, we fly through the same piece of sky. If we have rare earth metals, those same asteroid impacts have impacted the moon. The difference is on the moon, there is no active geology, there is no active hydrosphere, there is no active atmosphere. So anything that impacted the moon billions of years ago is today right where it was billions of years ago. In other words, there could very well be, and I'm not saying there is because I don't know, but there very well could be trillions of dollars, tens of trillions of dollars in large deposits of platinum group metals on the moon. And if that's the case, that if somebody were to be able to capitalize on those discoveries, it could change the balance of power on Earth. I'm not saying that's the case. By the way, it is very expensive to get to the moon. It's very expensive to extract those resources. It's very expensive to get them home. So the business case may or may not close. But I do think it's important to set the regulatory certainty necessary to capitalize and encourage that activity. And the same principles apply at the moon that would apply over international waters.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we've come to the end of this Aerospace Nation. And I'd like to thank again the Administrator Bridenstine and General Raymond. You both are doing magnificent work, and we wish you all the best for continued success. So to you and to our audience, from all of us here at the Mitchell Institute, have a great aerospace power kind of day.
And thank you very much. And Administrator Bridenstine, thanks for joining us this morning, and thanks to the Mitchell Institute. And for Teresa that asked that last question that I didn't get a chance to answer, we'll reach out to you and I'll get you an answer. But thanks very much for the opportunity.
Take care.
That's a real pleasure, General Deptula. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you.
Bye-bye.